if Montessori was a little bit more unified or united or under an umbrella where, as you said, some of the most successful schools in America are I don't know, you maybe call them chains, or, they're under an umbrella. And basically, the larger your umbrella, the more influence you have. And until you have that influence, you can't even you can't get a seat at the government table. You can't even really get to meet with curriculum authorities. You can't to meet. And I know, even though some of you are early childhood, you're having the same battles perhaps in the early childhood sectors around some of those same sorts of things, whether it be, floor beds or whatever. And unless we're under that larger umbrella, it's going to continue to be difficult.
So if you're there and you're able to turn on your video, it'd be great to be able to have a face-to-face conversation. And as usual, encourage everybody to jump in and ask questions. And it's the intention in Montessori Lives is for it to be more of an informal conversation rather than an interview. And we're lucky enough this evening to have Scott Cromwell with us. And he is a full-time teacher at the moment at Brisbane Montessori, one of our country's flagship Montessori schools. And,
we like to think so. Certainly, yeah, it's certainly a goal of ours.
Isn't it one of the oldest schools in Australia?
It's certainly one of the larger schools in Australia, and hopefully in the next few years should be going right from birth to year 12. So
certainly one of the most beautiful. I mean, your grounds are just stunning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Acres and acres of green space, which is, we're very privileged. And one of the reasons I've been there for most of the last 20 years. So.
And you're also director of pedagogical support there.
I am. That's a mouthful, and maybe I'll explain that in a moment. But I guess first I just wanted to say thank you for the invitation. While it may not be formal in the sense of an interview, it feels a little like an interview. So I'm feeling a little dressed up tonight. I've got the door locked, and hopefully the kids and the dogs stay in the background, but I'm sure that's quite a common experience for people over the last few years. But it's exciting to be here. So thank you for the invitation. I hope somewhere along tonight, we get something out of it, all of us, me included.
Well, you have a very interesting Montessori story. Obviously, by your accent, you're Australian now, but you didn't start that way. So how did you get here? And how did you discover Montessori along the way?
It is quite an interesting story. And I suppose probably like most people, I would feel like in some ways I didn't find Montessori. Montessori found me, and I'm just eternally grateful. We're going to have to rewind back to 1993, where I had just basically finished uni in Portland, Oregon. I grew up in Hawaii, but I had gone to uni up in Portland, Oregon, where I got through 4 years of uni, and people are like, so what do you want to do? I'm like, I have no idea. And I graduated with both a psychology and an arts major, and knew I didn't want to do either one of them professionally. And so I kind of did some soul searching, but at the same time, I suppose my psychology degree ironically led me into primary schools, doing a prac with a school psychologist. Now, again, I didn't want to become a psychologist, much less a school psychologist, but I loved being in schools. And so after graduating, I was looking for like a school assistance position, and there was a Montessori school down the road that was hiring, and said, what do you know about Montessori? I'm like, absolutely nothing, but I'm ready, willing, and able to learn. And it was a small school. They only had 2 classrooms across the hall from each other in rented premises, one 6 to 9 and one 9 to 12. And so I spent most of my time in the 6 to 9, and within 3 months, I was like, this is it. This is what I need to do. Having been in the state school system, I love being in schools, but this just felt more real, more authentic, more natural. And I was like, how do we do this? What do we do? And at the time, there were only 3 training centers in the world. Particularly, I was working with AMI teachers, Association Montessori International, one of whom trained in Washington, D.C., and one of whom trained in Bergamo in Italy. I was like, oh, I like that thought. Let me do that. So I sold off everything I owned, moved to Italy for the year. That was 94, 95. And I knew basically in that step that I was unlikely to return to the States anytime soon. And that's what's happened. I left in 94, and from Bergamo, I went to Australia, to Canberra, and basically I was offered. I was interviewing in Perth, interviewing in Sydney, and some of the parents of all people called me up from Canberra Montessori and said, "Would you be willing to come down and meet with us?" And I had a number of contacts and friends in Australia at this point who said, "No, not Canberra. Don't go," especially coming from Hawaii. It was like the last place you want to go. And but I did, and they were throwing some money at me and showed me an empty room and said, "We want a primary program, and we're here, we hear you're the guy." I don't know how they heard that, but Anthony Milano actually probably dubbed me in at one stage. I did my training, for those who know Anthony Milano. He's still down in Sydney as a Montessori director, and it was the job. It was the position. I loved it. I was there for 5 years, started the primary program when it was on 3 different campuses. After I left, they amalgamated. They're all on the one campus now, and they're still going strong. 5 years in Canberra, and then needed to get back to, warm, sunny beaches. So moved north to Brisbane. Still haven't made it to the warm, sunny beaches. Brisbane, for those who know, is a good hour and a half from the coast. And certainly Brisbane Montessori over in the western suburbs is. And I've been at Brisbane most of that time, for the last 20 odd years, and bar for almost 3 years, where I went overseas and was running a school in Germany, just outside Frankfurt. But Brisbane Montessori has been mostly lower primary, upper primary, middle school, back to lower primary, back to upper primary, head of school for a little while. And having both run schools in Germany and in Australia, I sort of realized that, the desk and the office, not necessarily essentially who I am and where I want to be. It's classroom work. It's working with the students. It's working with the parents. It's that journey that you have with the people, the little people in the room. And so I'm back in a room in a 9 to 12 class. I've been there 6 or 7 years at least. And but I'm still part of the leadership team. So you mentioned the Director of Pedagogical Support, which is kind of a weird, fancy, self-made title, basically to say that I help others to understand the how we do what we do part. So not curriculum, not what we teach, but it's a lot of parent education, making videos, hosting parent nights, explaining Montessori to people, to new teachers, mentoring new teachers, supporting people to understand what Montessori is and how we do it, because I think that's one of the big challenges. We're speaking a different language, and we're in a classroom doing weird and wonderful things. And if people don't understand it, parents included, students included, other educators and other schools and other, even government officials, it's going to be hard to continue doing what we do in terms of progressing and growing Montessori. So that's a brief part of the story.
Germany in there as a footnote. Why Germany? How did you end up there, and what did you do?
So after, after 10 years in Australia, it was like, I had trained in Italy. I'd actually been there a number of years before, just after high school, as doing European trips. I love the history and the culture, and everywhere you go in Europe is a new experience, and I wanted my family to experience that. So I took my family over, my wife and we had a 1-year-old at the time, and we got to Germany. We had a second child over there, third on our way. By that time, we were on our way back. My wife was sort of saying, no, need to go back to Australia, need family support and those sorts of things. But Germany was like right in the middle of Europe. And we pretty much every school holidays we spent traveling. We'd have weekends in Paris and You know, we travel down to Italy and Greece for a week, and we go over to Prague, and just it was a truly memorable and an enormous experience. I was really interested to see and experience some of the differences in Montessori education, Montessori history in Europe. Because as I said, I'd come from America, where I found Montessori, or Montessori found me, and been teaching in Australia. So this is now my certainly third continent. And Montessori took a huge hit after you know, World War II. Montessori schools all over, particularly through places like Germany and Italy, were just shut down overnight. And Montessori has taken a long time to claw its way back, to really evolve and grow and develop after many of the schools were shut down. And Germany in particular is really interesting because they have still a sort of a particular high school environment where they have 3 tiers in the high school, and they have a, you know, our particular school is a gymnasium, which is sort of the top tier academic track for all students who are planning on going to university, for example. And it's highly competitive and highly structured and highly results oriented, with the homework and the grades and the tests and the relentless stress that students feel. So the founders of this particular school that hired me, because they knew enough about Montessori, and their children had been through Montessori, to know that they needed Montessori for their own children, but more importantly for the community and for the country. They just didn't know enough about how to do it. And so I was brought in, having done having done my primary training, and then while I was there, I went over to America and did the NAMTA orientation for adolescents as well, so that I could assist in that development and the growth of the high school. And it was great. I had a chance to work with David Kahn on several occasions, bring him over to the school and have him, you know, do what he does or used to do, in hooking people up and you know, putting people together. But Germany was hard. Parents were still wanting and needing that expectation of knowing exactly what their children are doing, how they're tracking with the grades and the homework and the tests. And we experienced that a little bit here in Australia, but in Germany, it was a whole nother level. And I remember one particular community meeting, and there must have been, I mean, this school was, you know, 550 odd students. It was quite large. And, you know, I'd say 550 of them had joined the school in the last 5 years. The school was only 5 years old. And so they were all new. And a few of them had come through CASAs, they'd come through children's houses, but the majority of them were being brought in. I'd have a Schnuppertag, which is a sniffer day, where students come, like a trial day. You know, we'd bring in 200 or 300 students at a time. All my teachers were on duty for the day, like on a Saturday, and they'd put the kids through, you know, through their paces, so to speak. They'd teach in the classroom. They'd kind of give them some lessons, really to give students as much of an opportunity to kind of taste Montessori, but also so the teachers could kind of get to know the kids and you know, a little bit. I mean, it was barely a day, but we'd have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students coming to these things, and ultimately, you know, enroll, you know, a couple of hundred or 100. I guess it was towards the end, was 100 almost a year, and without any Montessori experience. So it was in a German system where 98% of the people, German was their first language, even though it was supposed to be an international Montessori school. So it was supposed to be bilingual. And I helped them with that because I didn't speak any German. So as a school leader, I would go in there and say, hey, we need to redo our policies all in English. We need to make sure that our enrollment documents are in English. We need to make sure we hire English-speaking teachers. So it's not, you know, I would go to board meetings, and I'd have to say to all the board members, we need to have this meeting in English now. So it was a really interesting experience, and but it was valuable. And particularly the 3 to 6 and the 6 to 12 primary environments are still really going strong in terms of Montessori. The high school is located in an adjacent building, and I think it's gone a little bit more traditional in terms of German high schools. But the school is still there, just outside Frankfurt, and the area was just stunning up in Bad Homburg and surrounds. Loved it. Highly recommend it if you get a chance. And one of the reasons I have loved being in Montessori is that you can travel anywhere in the world. I've worked in schools in Portland. I've worked in schools in Hawaii. I've worked in schools in several cities in Australia and in Germany. And we all speak the same language, even if it's different languages.
Do you think Montessori needs to be adapted to different cultures, different places where it's embedded, or is it?
Look, I think there's an aspect there's an aspect of the curriculum, there's an aspect of the culture, which does need to be adapted. I mean, I would and have had to, as a teacher, particularly an American speaking teacher and an American educated teacher coming over to Australia, I've had to educate myself. I've had to learn simple things like vocabulary, aluminium instead of aluminum, and those are really simple examples, but we've had to adapt to the place that we're at because we want to work in that environment and speak the same language, so to speak. But those are fairly superficial sorts of things. The pedagogy, the how we do what we do, I think generally could and should work anywhere. Now, that was difficult in Germany, and I'm sure it would be difficult in other educational environments too, where the community says they want something. They love the idea of autonomy and freedom and children making choices and the flexibility, but they just don't know how when their culture is so rigid in some sense, and strict and rule-oriented. So I think I think Montessori can work and should work because it's based on the developmental needs of the children. It's just how that works with the cultural aspects of the society that you're in.
So what's your view on teaching languages other than English in Australia after the experience with immersion in Germany?
Look, and Australia is very parallel to America in many senses, in many ways, like their approach, and it's a very difficult one. I think unless foreign languages other than English, particularly the immersion model, incredibly difficult in Australia. Ideally, you're looking at a model. Germany worked really well for us because we had 2 adults in each class, a class teacher and an assistant, and one of them was native German speaking, one of them was native English speaking, and it might be either way. You'd have a German speaking teacher with a English speaking assistant or vice versa, but you had both languages, both native speakers, both communicating full time in their mother tongue and able to obviously communicate with each other. So at least one of them had to speak the other's language, so to speak. That was a pretty rare occurrence, and in bilingual schools, I think that's the ideal, where you have both languages, so to speak, being offered consistently. And obviously from a Montessori perspective, it's ideal because you have 2 adults. Kids will gravitate towards one more than the other. It's really tricky when you have a non-native speaker trying to speak. I mean, I've taught Italian, tried to teach French, I've taught some German, but I'm not a native speaker in any of those sorts of things. And I fumble and I stumble. And most of what I reduce myself to is vocabulary and short phrases. There's no real language development there. And even when I've worked with native speaking language teachers in Australia, you may see them an hour to an hour and a half once a week. And some of the children will enjoy that. And some of the children might pursue that even further, particularly if it's done in a Montessori way, small group teaching, materials on the shelf, where the children can pursue it on their own if they're interested. However, that's the rarity. That doesn't happen very often. What tends to happen more often, it's like, okay, ideally small group, but even if it's whole class, it's like, okay, I'm here for a short limited period of time. I'm here to download as much information or to communicate or to talk to you as much as I can in my native language. You're going to absorb and do some activities and try and learn a little bit as much as you can. Fast forward 6 years down the track, and the kids are still barely counting and doing basic greetings. And really, I think there's been a huge challenge. And I think the disadvantage, particularly in Australia, is we just don't have that access, that normality of street signs and menus and communications and adverts on TV, where you would in Germany. You'd see the French, you'd see the Italian, you'd see a lot of those bordering languages. It's just a much richer environment from that language perspective. You know, America has a little bit of that, particularly with the Spanish, you know, but it's difficult. It's
Do you think
difficult.
there's any point, though, in teaching a foreign language when children don't have a cultural connection with that language that they're learning? What did Montessori have to say about teaching a foreign language?
I couldn't answer that with any authority, Mark. I'm sure you already have the answer there. You could share with us. But I would say that the earlier the better. And unfortunately, you know, there's a real challenge in both the Australian and probably to a large degree the world around not really recognizing and supplying adequate resourcing for the younger children and early childhood, and even, you know, 0 to 3, whether it be languages or language in general, it doesn't matter. It's just that language rich environment. So the earlier they can be exposed and be able to talk with or communicate with native speakers, but also you know, it's I suppose for me it's a little bit like as I said, I come mostly from a primary perspective, so it's you know, a lot of what I teach in the classroom, I'm trying to open doorways, trying to provide keys, trying to provide exciting experiences, and then allowing the children to continue on their own. At the end of the day, at the end of the week, the month, the year, the 3 years that they're with me, I'm not expecting them to have learned or remembered everything that I've taught, because it's not about that. It's about being able to open the door, to inviting them to step through the door. And so some will do that more than others. Some will do that in some areas more than others. You'll get some who love the sciences, some who love the maths, some who love English. Ideally, you have some who love French or Italian or German, or whatever it is you're offering as well, without the expectation that they're going to become fluent in that language. A lot of kids, you know, go through 3 years in my class and they're not necessarily fluent in maths or in English or in science, you know. But I just hope that, you know, you've unlocked a door, you've inspired some interest, and it's up to them really after
I think
that.
this could be something that AI can really contribute to Montessori that wasn't available before. So you have programs like Duolingo or uh, um, the Rosetta Stone that are really responsive and can listen to students talking back in that target language, and then respond and learn as the student and learn as the students learn. And that would be a way to individualize foreign language learning.
I'll tell you a funny little story, Mark, because I did have not one but 2 students in my class in term 1, and one of whom stayed through term 2. But let's call them, I mean, effectively they were foreign students who were here for a term, visiting, one from the Netherlands and one from Germany. And their enrollments were quite late and quite unexpected. And neither of them, well, one of them had come from a Montessori background in Germany, but again, it was not probably authentic Montessori in the way that we would necessarily relate to. And the other one had actually come through a Steiner education and knew nothing about Montessori. And neither one of them spoke English. And one was sort of year 4 and one was year 5, sort of, you know, around that 9 and 10-year-old level. And while they would have been starting learning English in their schools in a formal way, the communication really wasn't there. So technology to the rescue. We developed a system really quick, and because we had to. We had to be able to communicate, where I would give a lesson, no kidding. I would give a lesson and I would have iPads on either side of me. And I would have the German student and the Dutch student in this lesson with English speaking Australian students. And it might be a story lesson, or it might be an explanation of, you know, a bead frame or whatever it may be. And I had translators going on both iPads, usually voice to text. So I would voice to text and it would pop out in their language so they could actually read it as I was talking. And also, and they were able to follow the lessons, and I was able to give the same lesson with, you know, that voice to text translation happening. And then when we needed a conversation, we could change it voice to voice, or we do voice to text in the reverse. They would voice, and then I would read it in English.
Mm.
We also started using Word, which actually has a brilliant translation function. So all the documentation I used in the room, from jobs charts to, instructions to reflection sheets, I could just switch the language to Dutch, boom, print it out, and they had it right in front of them, in exactly the same format. And oh man, it was a lifesaver. And we learned quick, and we learned that we could still, these kids both, were able to function, in a Montessori classroom in a relatively short period of time, thankfully, due to technology, which is not something, we do, and we have iPads and we have computers in the 9 to 12 environment. But they were really functional tools at that point, like life-saving functional tools to really help integrate the kids into this school. And as I said, we had to learn very quick, because we weren't expecting them, until a week or 2 weeks maybe before they started.
So in your 30 years as a Montessorian,
Oh, that sounds like a big intro. Yep. Okay.
what's
30.
kept you going? What have you most enjoyed about being a Montessori educator?
I'd like to say that I've asked myself that question many times. What's kept me going? And look, it does happen occasionally where I do ask myself that question, but not very often, not as often as you think. And yes, I have hard days. And yes, both being a leader and a classroom teacher, there are hard days, and you come home and you have a big whinge and a chat and a discussion, and your wife kind of goes, you need to do something about it, or I'm sick and tired of hearing about it, or whatever they might say, just hypothetically, of course. But not as often as you think. I think 30 years in Montessori has flown by. What's kept me going? Every day is new. Every day is different. I love the freedom and the flexibility to follow the interests of the students. The creativity. I love being able to bring a lot of myself into it, whether it be my Hawaiian background. I'm just looking at a wall full of ukuleles over here that I bring into the classroom. My art. I'm an archery instructor. I can do archery. I love the outdoors and love, and things where I don't feel like I'm confined or constrained by the system. Oh no, you're not allowed to do that because you're supposed to be teaching, chapter 4 in maths today, or whatever it is. And equally, it's not just me bringing myself into the classroom; it's all the students bringing themselves into the classroom. Where, somebody's just been on a trip to Japan, great. You want to do a presentation on it, or as I said, students from the Netherlands and from Germany come in and tell us about it, and then maybe we can all learn and we can all do something about it. So a lot of it's been that creativeness, the flexibility, the following the students, and as I said, learning. I'm constantly learning, whether it be learning Australian, or learning Dutch, or relearning Germany just to communicate with people. Look, I love the service aspect of it, feeling like I'm, I haven't always been necessarily humble, but I think in my later years, I've become much more humble and appreciating that I'm providing a service, that I'm looking after people, that I'm helping to ideally shape the world, to provide us all with a better future. Now I'm just getting a little sentimental and a little waffly, but there are many reasons. And clearly you don't do this just because it's a job that you're getting paid for, because there are many times I don't feel like teachers are paid enough. It's a job that I love and I continue to love. And I'm so thankful that I do continue to love it.
Mm-hmm. Has it helped or hindered having a wife who's also a Montessori educator? Mandy.
Yes, it is both helped and hindered. No, really, look, I met Mandy originally at Brisbane Montessori, and then she has since worked at a number of different early childhood education centers. And I love that she is also in the Montessori world, that we speak the same language, that we can have really meaningful conversations about Montessori. And it's not to say we always agree, but we're at least, I'm not trying to necessarily understand real estate and the nuances of real estate, or engineering, or some other, career, and the fact that we're both dedicated our lives to working with children, and to helping adults understand child development. So I think by and large, it's absolutely helped. It's been, and without being, it's not like we come home every day and we're talking about, yes, we do talk about our days as any couple would, but we're not obsessing about Montessori all the time. There's lots of other things happening in our lives, and our children range from 8 to 20, and they've all, on their own journey. So we spend, at least as much time talking about our children as we do about Montessori. And I feel like we're, I'll grab it here. A lot of it's on the same page, literally, with positive discipline, with parenting, with Montessori. So that's good. It's a benefit.
You've seen Montessori in so many different cultures and countries around the world. You've seen how well it works, how it enriches the lives of children everywhere. Why do you think it's not more widely accepted in Australia in particular? Worldwide in general, but in particular Australia. It's really undergoing a renaissance, I would say, in the United States at the moment, becoming much more of a household word. But in Australia, it's still.
I have my thoughts, and I know, Mark, because we've had these conversations, that you have thoughts. You probably have a lot more substantial knowledge on that topic, particularly as you keep in touch with a lot of those American trends. I would say, largely, I don't know. I find it incredibly frustrating, though. When I give a lot of parent conversations, parent evenings, and information sessions, I do talk about Montessori is perhaps the world's best kept secret. And sometimes it feels like it is, even though, I'll tell you this, even though we have the Guinness Book of World Records, largest school in the world, right? I'm going to mess it up now. I want to say some 50,000 plus students in a Montessori school. Vicky is either disagreeing with me or just shaking her head in disbelief. I'm not sure which. But, and I know you can Google it. You can say largest school in the world or Guinness Book of World Record largest school, and it's a Montessori school. So, and Montessori is the largest pedagogy in the world. There are no other pedagogies, be it International Baccalaureate or Steiner or any other pedagogy that is more widespread than Montessori. And
Isn't
it's just
behaviorism more widespread?
It depends on, I suppose, how you would define the movement or the title, right? If you said behaviorism, I don't know if that's an approach. Oh, hang on, Vicky's messaging something. India, almost 60,000 K perhaps this year. I mean, that's just unbelievable in one school. But my point is that it is so big in some ways.
Yeah.
And yet nobody knows about it. I mean, we have residents in our own neighborhood who will drive by, maybe see a sign for an open day, go, stop by at the open day, go, wow, we've lived in this neighborhood for 10 years and we never knew you were here. I'm like, are you kidding me? We've been here for like 35 years and we're one of the biggest schools in Queensland. How is that even possible? Look, I think just to go back to that, the Renaissance in America, I think America perhaps, whether it be through its, I don't know, you probably could talk a little bit about why that's happening. But my understanding is that the government has relaxed a lot of the regulations and allowed for charter schools, magnet schools, and other various branches of education that Australia hasn't. And largely we have mainstream and we have independent. And the independent is, dominated 90%, 95% by the religious sects, of Catholic and Lutheran. And then Montessori and Steiner make up this really tiny percentage. And I feel a lot of it has to do with the government regulations around the expectations of what a school looks like and needs to look like, around curriculum structures, even particularly what, Montessori, Steiner, or International Baccalaureate. If you want to be teaching in Australia and you want to be recognized by the Australian curriculum authorities in ACARA, this is what it needs to look like. And basically it needs to look like the Australian curriculum.
Well, also the fact that in America, you can have for-profit schools, whereas you can't in Australia. There's some really interesting, what's the word, kind of dualism, thought dualism about contradictory thought about whether you can have for-profit in early childhood, but not in primary school.
Mm.
And I don't quite understand why it would apply in one sector, but not the other. But in America, of course, there are these huge Montessori chains, corporate chains that are growing rapidly and helping to bring Montessori to many more people. But here you can't do that. And so,
And there's a much bigger conversation in terms of whether you look at, something like Guidepost, but you look at it like a McDonald's, and it becomes a chain, or it becomes your fast food version, a franchise. And then is that, at what point, or how much are you watering down? Are you losing your individualism, and are you, or do the benefits outweigh, because you are actually spreading the word of Montessori? And if you do it well enough, and you do it in a more standardized fashion about what Montessori looks like, perhaps it's benefiting the whole movement. Yeah.
yeah. Well, some people would say the Guidepost schools are among the most authentic Montessori schools. I mean, there are definitely problems with that model. There's a lot of teachers that I know from Guidepost schools that feel that they are underpaid and exploited, and there's a high staff turnover, but their schools are very, the quality control at those schools is very, very good. At other chains, maybe not so much. So it really
And as
depends.
you say, it depends a little bit of the funding behind it, whether it's private, whether it's government, whether it's. I went when we took our students to New York for the MMUN earlier in the year. We went and visited a Montessori school on the Upper East Side, which is one of the wealthier neighborhoods, particularly in New York City. And I think we walked in there. The whole school was a total of 12 students or 18 students over 3 or 4 different classes. I mean, one class had 4 students in it. And clearly they must have had some financial backing, because that just wouldn't really fly in Australia. I've never worked. I mean, my smallest class was 9, and that was the first year. And then after that went 15, and then I've worked in classes up to 50 with 2 teachers. So, there's the I don't know, economy of scales, and maybe the funding and the backing behind it all. So,
Yeah.
but I think really the ultimate is America has evolved into a position where they're much more flexible about their educational models, and maybe Australia, look, ideally in so many other ways, we're 10, 15 years behind America. Maybe that's hopefully one of the positive ways that we're behind them. We're moving in that direction, but I don't know. I haven't seen it
Yeah.
yet.
I think Americans have really accepted, when I was there anyway, until about 7 or 8 years ago, the general culture and the government had really accepted that it's not working. Traditional education is just not working, and we need to try some other things. And Australia, I think we're just beginning to get to that point now, where the government's ready to admit.
Yeah, and where is that point? I mean, is it going to be national testing? Is it NAPLAN scores? Is it PISA scores? Is it parents rioting in the streets? Is it I don't know. It's frustrating, because we all know, because we all speak the same language. We know that in many cases mainstream is just not fitting the bill anymore. It's just not addressing the needs. And there's high teacher turnovers, there's high teacher burnout, there's schools and in some cases teachers, and the system in general is just not being flexible to the needs of students or to the needs of parents. And I think Montessori has certainly the capacity, if not already doing, is meeting those needs. But as you say, it's a flow through effect. You almost need government awareness and government support, and that hasn't happened at the school level anyway.
Susan, did you want to jump in on? Oh, you made a comment about for-profit schools.
I think that you could have a school owned by that you could have profit. I think that I think you just need to have a board. It's not. I don't.
I'll jump in on that, Susan. You need to be a not-for-profit school in Australia.
Oh, you do?
Schools need to be not-for-profit if they're going to receive government funding. And it translates down to being registered as a school and using the Australian curriculum. So not-for-profits, of course, always make lots of money anyway, but they're acknowledged as not-for-profit to ensure that the money is ploughed back into the school. That's the only reason.
Thanks, Liz.
So back to that question, Scott, about why is not Montessori this fantastic, best kept secret in the world? Why is it not more widely accepted? Is it them or is it us? Is it the people out there who don't understand Montessori and don't make the effort to come find out about it? Or is it something that we're doing or not doing?
You might have just answered your own question, Mark. Look, I think by and large, the community is largely unaware. However, having said that, and I've been the subject of newspaper articles. You know, I know schools are out there marketing and doing media, and parents do talk, but it's not spreading. It's not spreading like wildfire. I do think generally there's a lack of awareness. However, Montessori schools focus on children. They focus on parents. You know, that's their core business. They're not necessarily set up, nor do they have the time, money, the experience to get out there and market. You know, and I'll go back to the McDonald's example, when you buy into a McDonald's franchise, you know, 99% of your marketing is done already. It's already out there. Everybody knows the brand. It's worldwide. You didn't have to do any of that. You just had to set up shop and people will flock. And that largely happened, you know, I mean, it started with one shop, but it really happened through branding, through, you know, a particular niche that spread around the world. And I'm not advocating for McDonald's, but the question is really, if Montessori was a little bit more unified or united or under an umbrella, where, you know, as you said, some of the most successful schools in America are I don't know, you maybe call them chains, or, you know, they're under an umbrella. And basically, the larger your umbrella, the more influence you have. And until you have that influence, you can't even you can't get a seat at the government table. You can't even really get to meet with curriculum authorities. You can't get to meet. And I know, even though some of you are early childhood, you're having the same battles perhaps in the early childhood sectors around some of those same sorts of things, whether it be, you know, floor beds or whatever. And you know, unless we're under that larger umbrella, it's going to continue to be difficult. You know, we're, you know, 100 schools or something. Liz could probably even come up with a figure right now across Australia that are operating as 100 individuals or 100 individual schools, and doing all the same 100 individual little steps in trying to market and trying to meet and trying to greet and trying to explain who we are and what we do.
That would be good. 100. We have 50 in Australia.
Okay. So
and 11 of them are public, and about 38. I mean, it might have changed. This was a figure from a couple of years ago, but it might have been, it might be a little more.
But aside from the Noosa Montessori school, I don't think a school is opened in Australia, not as an independent school in again, I don't know,
as far
10,
as I
15,
know,
20
Noosa
years.
was the last one, and that was about 10, 12 years ago. And before Noosa, the previous one was about 11 years before that. So I think this could be, I wonder if it's just part of the not-for-profit model, is that you have a community school like Brisbane Montessori, which is really good at what it does, look from the outside anyway, but it looks really successful. But is there any reason why Brisbane Montessori would want to expand its footprint? I mean, it serves its own population really well, but there's no impetus to expand to different sites. But this is what capitalism does really well. It's expansive and it pushes outward. And this is perhaps why these big corporate chains in America are really pushing Montessori into the
corporatization in Montessori. So you were suggesting perhaps if people were more motivated by money, now maybe I'm just paraphrasing and maybe I'm totally off base here, but if people are more motivated by money, which basically means more customers and more clientele, they would be a little bit more open-minded, perhaps even a little bit more aggressive about expanding their operations, their businesses. Whereas we generally in the Montessori community, don't look at it that way. We want to serve the community. We want more students have more access, but we're not doing it from a money base, right? We're doing it from a students, deserving more. And so it's very, very slow growth. And obviously as individual schools, and I've worked at Canberra and I've worked at Brisbane in particular, every time you change leadership, every time you change principals, that's in jeopardy. I mean, we had one year where we went from 300 students down to 200 students from December to January. Change of principal, and not based on fact, but based on fear and rumor, and catastrophic. And it's taken us 10 plus years to get back over that 300 mark. That's not growth. That's stagnation. I do like what Vanessa and their school is doing over at Rockingham Montessori over in Perth, where they have, and it's south of Perth, they've set up campuses. They've got this idea of pop-up schools, and they have their main campus, but they've actually recognized a financial model where they can hire space, call it an old Harvey Norman storefront on a strip mall, off the main highway, where everybody's driving past it, hundreds, thousands of cars every day. And they go and hire a space. They've worked out they can fit 3 classrooms into this space, immediately fill it with children and 3 teachers. And within a year, within 2 years, they're paying the rent, they're growing, they're establishing their own footprint on this site. Now, there are always challenges with that. You've got new students who presumably are non-Montessori. You've got maybe teachers that you're training on the job. You've got 1 3 to 6, 1 6 to 9, 1 9 to 12 on a site that's isolated from the main campus. You maybe don't have a playground experience, happening at the moment, but they're working on their 4th site or something. Yeah. They're exploring a new model in an effort to provide more Montessori to more students. And again, not from the capitalization or the corporatization. Yeah. And I'm not arguing with that. That's not a bad model to explore, if that's even a possibility. But it's an interesting model that, as you say, if we all continue to look at our own little footprints and grow organically and grow, 1 classroom at a time for, nobody's really growing.
Yeah. It sounds like the wildflower experiment in the US, which is still flourishing. It's started about 20 years ago. They're small pop-up storefront Montessori schools in the US that are very low budget, where the administrator is a teacher, and they start very small and grow quickly. So if it's not going to be profit that pushes Montessori, then the only other way is cooperation, where Montessorians need to get together and cooperate and talk to each other and collaborate. Which is more likely to happen, the collaboration or the for-profit?
Oh, that's a very pointy question. Look, I don't even want to answer that question. Right. I think in my experience, having worked 30 years in both America and in Australia, cooperation is hard to come by. And one of the reasons, just even within a school, why I might have moved from a leadership position to a classroom position, why I really enjoy the classroom position, is because I like what I do, and I like being with the kids, and I like creativity, and I'm really just responsible for this group of amazing people. I don't have to necessarily join the adult political mess that's out there, even at my own school, hypothetically speaking. Working with people and adults and the politics and the egos, even within a school, much less a state, much less an entire country, is difficult, is messy. And we've certainly seen a long history in America, particularly with some of the large Montessori organizations, AMI, AMS, IMC, and so on, with all these acronyms of people really not seeing eye to eye, not cooperating, not getting along, and then going, okay, so we're going to do our own thing. We think we can do it better. And Australia is certainly not immune to that. So I don't know. I haven't ever been down that corporatization model. But I'm not adverse to trying if I have experienced 30 years of an alternative, which is struggling. And the ironic thing in all this is Montessori is really all about peace and about communication and about connection. And we know this. And this is what we talk about in the classroom. And yet, it's not the reality. It's not the reality in the adult world. It's not the reality in a lot of our organizations. So look,
Vicky mentioned the Budrum School and that experiment and Anna Bly. Vicky, do you want to talk about that? Do you know the history of why for-profit schools were?
Yeah, I know why she did it, but I believe Glenda owned the
Glenda's
school,
Hotel.
and there was another private school that was like a grammar school near Nambour that was also caught in this change of legislation. And the private grammar school at Nambour sold to Presbyterian Schools Association. And Glenda, I think, handed over to a school board, and I don't know any details about that. But I know that the legislation was rushed through because Eddie Groves of ABC Childcare infamy had decided to go into running schools. And so anti-for-profit was rushed through legislation to prevent that from occurring.
What do you think about profit and Montessori, Vicky? Can they cohabitate successfully?
I have mixed feelings about the for-profit model. I think that our family, our homes are on the line. We're totally invested in the outcomes for the children in our care, and we do hope to grow and continue to serve further communities through the profit. However, I do think for profit where it's publicly listed and where there is a shareholder element, I think that can lose sight of the mission. And let's face it, Education for Peace is a mission. It's not just a product. So yes, I have mixed feelings about that. I would certainly like to be able to do more in the for-profit sphere, which I can't do. I've often said I'd like to open a school. However, my brothers just keep saying, no, we don't have enough time to do the stuff we're doing now, let alone doing something that's going to only cost more money. So it's mixed feelings, I guess, because it depends on motives. But then you also find in community-based organisations, there are individuals in there that are in there for their own gain as well. They find themselves a niche where they can and are often exploitive of their position. So it comes down to the human beings involved, and we're a motley crew, aren't we?
So Mark, I've got a question for you then. If it came down to for-profit schools, where does that leave? I mean, we know that families already struggle to afford school fees in a not-for-profit situation. In a for-profit situation where you're not accessing government funding, presumably fees would be much higher. How are you servicing the community then? How are you making it accessible? And I'm not saying it's really accessible right now. It just seems like it'd be even worse. Yeah. Look, we know we have colleagues that are working in state schools, and which is brilliant because anybody and everybody in that community is getting access. But it's hard work, and it's within the government system, and it's not necessarily as authentic as we might like to see, because there are lots of compromises that need to be made and lots of decisions that are being made at a higher level within the school that are not necessarily ideal from a Montessori perspective or influencing your Montessori program. So if you went complete privatization, wouldn't the school fees just skyrocket? Wouldn't they be double what they are already?
Yeah, that hasn't necessarily happened in the US. Some of the private schools have quite reasonable fees, but it is private Montessori, I feel, is a workaround that hasn't worked really over the last century, that we really need to get our act together to influence government and the general population to understand how traditional education is not working and how Montessori can be an answer to that. I mean, the United States has almost 600 public schools, 150 of them go from K to 12, year 12. So that's why it's really becoming more of a household word than it is here. And I think the ultimate goal should be for us, and this is a new focus for Montessori Australia over the last 3 years or so, is to really influence government and to get more Montessori into the public system. The difficulty, of course, is training, and because of union rules and government regulation, it's really hard for public school teachers to do, intensives that take half their summer. They're just not allowed to do that. And so we need to redesign training and get away from this traditional model of Montessori training where we all sit in front of the presenter who moves speed bars and we watch it. Technology offers so much flexibility that we could be using, but we're not really making use of that yet.
But you're coming back to that argument about influencing government, whether to get into government schools or to influence government policy or to change labor laws or union rules. I mean, those are huge. How does that happen? How do you influence government?
Yeah, it's a good question. Do you think that there are any areas where you think Montessori needs to be updated to be a better fit for the modern world? I think part of the issue might be that when we talk to government officials about Montessori, often the first thing that comes into their mind is this image of an elderly Italian woman dressed in black who died 70 years ago. And their automatic assumption is, oh, that's obsolete. We need the new thing, the new fad, the latest thing in education, which is going to fix our NAPLAN scores. And that's not it, because it comes from a century ago.
No, and I have that conversation with parents all the time. And obviously the government focus really is because they're looking for the new and the modern, because whatever they're doing currently isn't working. And that's not true in Montessori. Yes, there is a long history of Montessori education, and that approach, the pedagogy, has not really changed. And I guess the conversation I have with parents and the presentations that I give is that it's because we're not looking for the outcome. We're not looking for the test scores. We're not looking to please parents. We're not being told by parents or by government what we should be teaching. Our pedagogy and much of the underlying curriculum, the what we teach, is to address the needs of the child. And the needs of the children haven't changed in the last 100 years, 120 years. They're the same. They still go through all the same developmental milestones of crawling and walking, babbling and talking, communicating, and all those sorts of things. Some of those ages, some of those milestones shift slightly, have shifted over the last 100 years, but really the milestones are still there. So we're meeting those needs. Those needs haven't changed. So Montessori pedagogy shouldn't need to change. Are there additional technologies that are available to meet some of those same needs? Yes, particularly around the digital computer, screen technologies are available. However, we need to be extremely careful, because the pedagogy behind all that is, connecting the mind and the hand, the doing, the movement, the muscle memory, the connection with real substances, the connection with the outdoors. And you're not getting most of that through the digital technologies, through looking at a screen. I'm not saying they're not valuable and they're not useful at times as a tool, much like the bead frame is a tool or the checkerboard is a tool. We're not going to be, we shouldn't be suckered into learning from a computer. Now, if students go on a journey, and I think you mentioned things like Duolingo, where particularly as they get older, they want to teach themselves a language, there's opportunities there. Would it be better to, go and live in Italy for a year and learn from, living in the environment and speaking Italian with, in Italy and understanding the whole of the cultural aspect? Absolutely. So it's more about living through the experiences rather than trying to imitate them on a screen or through digital technology. I think the point there is that the pedagogy hasn't changed, and our pedagogy continues to, and in the future will actually continue to be more and more relevant in terms of those hands-on experiences, real world experiences, continue to, feed the brain through the hand, all of those sorts of things. And look, honestly, I think a lot of the growth and development of education around the world has been in that direction. Things that we talk about were new and different in Montessori's age. Her cutting down furniture to fit the children, those kinds of things. Well, nobody thinks about that anymore because everybody does it. It's automatic. It's an assumption. The golden beads that have become MAB blocks for use in schools on a more commercial basis. So there are many areas. The recognition of individualized education and those sorts of things, they're all catching up just very slowly. It's happening, but very slowly. Are there things that we need to modernize? Look, I think we're still, even as Montessorians, stuck in a little bit of a trap of what school is. And so school is going to be 25 students in a classroom. Yes, they're going to be 3 age groups, but it's still 25 students, generally 1 teacher. Okay, the assistant is a bonus. But you take away the assistant and the 3 age groups, it's the same as any other school in Australia or America. It's very traditional. Oh, when are you going to go to school? Yeah, we're going to go to school from 9 till 3. Why? Well, that's what we've always done. It's still a very traditional system. Are there ways around that? Or is there more flexible thinking? I mean, I worked with Stephen Arnold, who's now down in Auckland, working with a peace school. He was a thinker outside the box, and pushing for a lot more flexible hours. School might open at 6:30 or 7 for the younger ones and the families and the parents who need to be there. And then the high schoolers might not be expected to get there until 10 o'clock because they needed time to sleep in the mornings. But then they might be able to stay till 6. His peace school at the moment, kids are coming and going according to their own needs. Now, I gather the New Zealand educational regulation rules are far more flexible and free than in Australia. But he says I was talking to him a little while ago, and he was saying if a kid just needs to come in he has one student, he needs to come in to learn to read. So he goes in and he says, I need to learn to read. And this might be a year 8 student. I don't really know how to read. I need to learn. Oh, so Stephen will sit down. Okay, let's learn how to read. Another student might come in and say, I was up all night with my baby sister, caring for this, that, and the other. I've had no sleep. I just need to lie down and sleep. Oh, there's a couch over there. Go and sleep. It's really about meeting the needs of the individual students. I don't know how that was related to your original question there, but it was about, thinking outside the box and being more flexible and being more adaptable, not necessarily to the fad at the moment, but being more flexible and recognizing the needs of individuals. And that's hard when you have a government system like Australia that seems to be so highly regulated, and I understand why. And you've got to kind of look at the lowest common denominator and make sure that everybody's at least doing this. However, there needs to be recognition that Montessori is not just doing this. Montessori is way up here, and you can't hold us to the lowest standard because we're far more evolved and advanced than that.
And yet, despite the regulation, Australia's public education system is one of the most unequal and inequitable in the world. Scott, this has been such an interesting hour chatting to you. I could chat to you for hours. So thank you.
Oh, and we will continue, maybe just not in a recorded sense and without an audience all, sitting there in the background. But it has been lovely. I've enjoyed it. And again, thank you for that opportunity. And I hope the rest of our audience and our listeners have felt like it was an hour well spent. And you can always find me, Brisbane Montessori School. Drop me an email. Mark might even put it in the comments below. Those sorts of things. But I'd be happy to hear from anybody in the future about any of those topics that we talked about.
All right. Thank you, everybody. See you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, guys. All right.
Bye.
See ya.